We are on page 15 in the notes, and the deal is completing the square only works if there is a 1 before the x squared. It works for any problem if there's a 1 before the x squared, but only works if there's a 1 before the x squared. So what's your problem looking at page 15? And a 4 and a 3 and a 3. Completing the square only works if there's a 1 before the x squared. However, I also feel like I told you yesterday that completing the square will always work, so those don't really agree. What was that, Caitlin? That's what we're going to do in letter A, and in general, what we're going to do to make this work. If there's a number other than 1 before the x squared, we're going to just start by dividing everything by that A value. So, to solve a quadratic equation where A does not equal 1 by completing the square, we are first going to divide by that number out front. Because if we do that, we will get a 1 before the x squared, and we can use our method. There is something unfortunate that's going to happen, but we'll deal with that in a moment. And the good news is, even though it's going to be a little messier, the process will not change. It will be the exact same thing that we did last time. If there's a number other than 1 out front, we're going to first divide everything by 1. So, looking at letter A, I've got a 2 out front. That's not okay. I'm going to go and divide both sides, everything on both sides, by 2. Why is this unpleasant?
Make 7 over 2.
You're getting fractions. Okay. X squared plus 7 halves x equals 1/2. Our process will be the same, but it's just going to be a little messier because there are fractions in this. So first, let me add my little space in there. X squared plus 7 halves x plus something equals 1/2 plus something. So I first have to do half the middle term. It is a pain to divide fractions by 2. Rather than divide a fraction by 2, I could multiply it by what? That's going to be a lot easier. How do we do half the middle term? Let's do a half of 7 halves. 1/2 times 7 halves. And I'm going to square that. No, I'm dividing by 2. What's the reciprocal of 2? 1/2. I'm going to multiply by a half. I'm multiplying by the reciprocal of 2. Sure. Okay, well, what's a half times 7 halves? 7 4, just top times top and bottom times bottom. So I'm going to do 7/4, and I'm going to square that. And the point is, this gives me the number I'm going to add to both sides. How do you square a fraction? Actually, we did that yesterday. Whatever. What is it? 49 over 16. I'm going to add 49/16. Is that showing up? Oh, good. 49/16 on the left, and I'm going to add 49/16 on the right. We've got to do half the middle term and square it. It's a pain to divide fractions by 2, so don't. Multiply it by a half instead. That's easier to think about. I'm going to factor the left. Even though it's fractions, I still have my shortcut rule. It's going to be x and what number? That half the middle term before we do our squaring. So x plus 7/4 in parentheses squared. If you were to write that out twice in FOIL, you'd get your x squared plus 7 halves x plus 49/16 back. On the right, what do you have to do with that 1/2 and that 49/16? Do that. Go get a common denominator. Thinking 16 should be that common denominator. So I'm going to multiply by 8 over 8. This problem over here is this plus that. Perhaps 57/16?
At this point, I just think I'm wrong.
No, 57/16. And actually, this is going to end up being pretty good because it's 57/16. You'll see why in a moment. So I did 8/16 plus 49/16. No, Marcus? Do you have 49/16? Okay, so 1/2 plus that. Multiply the top and bottom by 8. 8/16 plus 49/16. 8 plus 49 should be 57. What's our next step? plus or minus the square root. So I'm going to say x plus 7/4 equals plus or minus the square root of 57 over the square root of 16. They're both good. What's the square root of 57? That's really nice that I don't have to break that down. Okay, what's the square root of 16? There's one last step that I know you know. Do that last step. Get the x by itself. Here. Yes.
Was it not recording that whole time?
Yes. They're watching and they're listening to you.
Who's watching and listening?
The football players.
But they're watching me.
No, they're watching what listening.
Wait, so they get
Everything on the screen, they will see.
Can they hear us?
I'm not sure if I should answer that.
Hi, Sean.
Negative 7/4 plus or minus root 57/4 here? Maybe? Possibly? These are going to be messier problems, but the process is the same as before with just that extra step of we're going to divide by that number up front. Letter B. You know what? Before I divide, I kind of want to do something else in B. Let's deal with that. Variables on one side, constant on the other, so minus 7 minus 7. 4c squared plus 10c equals negative 7. New step. What's our new step? Divide by 4. Now, I don't want to say 10/4 c. Anytime in your work that you can simplify things, do. Mostly because it's going to make your work a lot nicer. The numbers are going to be smaller and easier to work with. So let's not say 10/4 c. Let's say 5/2 c.
Would it still be right if we did 10/4 C?
It would be in the end, but the bigger the numbers are, the more places there are that you can make mistakes. So I think it's going to be better if we always get in the habit of trying to simplify. Now, I've got to add something. I want to see if you guys can take a moment and figure out your half the middle term squared thing. I would do some work for that. Okay, we've got c squared plus 5/2 c and negative 7/4. I want you to go do half your middle number. I don't care that it's already divided by 2. That has nothing to do with this. Our middle number is 5/2. Do half of that, squared and add it to both sides. So what's getting added to both sides? 25/16. I need to do half my middle term. I need to do half of 5/2. So let's say 5/2 times a half. Multiply top times top, bottom times bottom. 5 times 1 is 5. 2 times 2 is 4. 5/4. Which you're going to square. 25/16. By the way, I feel like I made a comment yesterday that I'm going to make again today. In my opinion, yesterday and today, this is some of the most difficult stuff in Algebra 2. This is hard.
Wait, this is the most hardest?
First of all,
That was the
not going to correct
That
that.
was the funniest joke.
25/16 is, we're just moving on. 25/16. I want to see if you can factor. Again, there's that shortcut rule for factoring.
Factoring with fractions?
But not really, because we have that shortcut rule of it's just half your middle number before we do the square. We already know what it is. That's,
16.
I think it's 5/4 inside there. Half that middle number before we squared it. Right? Okay, hold on. Here we go. I'm going to get c plus. Half my middle term, I already did that. That was 5/4, and I squared it to get 25/16. I want the number before I do the squaring, so 5/4. C plus 5/4 squared. Go do your common denominator work. I need you adding those two fractions together. Problem, Caitlin?
Can we end class or
Yeah, that sounds like something I would do.
It's just
Glad it recorded you.
Yeah, we work to the bell every single
it's like
day.
a nice Friday. Like today feels like a good day. Connie dropping the album today was like a good day.
It's very good. And you know what else makes today a really good day? There's completing the square involved.
Do we have homework?
Right now, I need you adding those fractions. The more distracted we are, the more difficult this is actually going to be. I hope you're multiplying by 4 and 4, so negative 28 fourths plus, not 28 fourths, negative 28 sixteenths plus 25 sixteenths. I'm getting negative 3 sixteenths over there. Yes? Try to finish it. Do your plus or minus the square root. They're both pretty nice. And then get the x by itself. I think we took care of the tougher parts together. Try to finish it.
I like wrote the odd in front of those.
It's so much
Not,
work.
not on, like, not.
Yeah, if you wrote in front of the fraction but after the plus or minus, that's still okay.
Okay. Theoretically, how many points would this be on the test?
It's like 8 or something because there's a lot of steps here, which means there's
I
places
feel like
for
I'm
partial
building
credits.
If I just skip this, then I just wouldn't get 8 points.
We're going to do more.
Well, if that made sense, maybe, yeah.
Letter C. I want you to go do the first 2 steps. The move things around and divide and then stop. And actually, part of this is going to be a little nicer. Part of it's going to be a little unpleasant, but part will be a little nicer. Letter C. Move and divide. And then stop.
There's so many steps. It's like hard to remember.
We're first going to get the variables on one side, constant on the other.
Oh, one of them isn't a fraction.
Actually, there's more than that.
It's a win.
2 of them aren't fractions, I think. 1x squared minus 4x equals negative 7/3. Add something, factor, and then stop. I want to do the square root part with you because something's going to happen.
Yeah,
We'll deal with that. We'll deal with it.
Oh my.
Add something to both sides. Half that middle number squared. Factor. Do half your middle. They're complaining about what's coming, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's the calm before the storm, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What?
What are you going to add? Yeah. Half of negative 4 is negative 2. Squared gives me 4. I'm going to do plus 4 there and plus 4 there. Your factoring is really nice. What is it? X minus 2 in parentheses squared. The other side, yeah, do your common denominator work.
So it's positive because you're squaring negative.
It's always, you're always going to add something because you're always, whatever you square becomes a positive thing in the end.
Yeah, but like you told me at like number 11 didn't.
There are 2 different things going on here. There's the what I'm adding to both sides, half the middle term squared, that is always a positive thing. Then there's the factoring where I do half my middle term, half of negative 4 is negative 2, that goes in the 2 different things going on. Perhaps 5/3? Oh, okay. I turned my 4 over 1 into 12 over 3. No? What's wrong?
Oh, nothing.
Weren't you saying no?
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't. We're fine. Don't worry.
We're okay so far, 5/3? Next step. Plus or minus to square root. So x minus 2 equals plus or minus root 5 over root 3. Here's the problem. What was that? Yeah, we mentioned this yesterday with that random homework problem. It will show up from time to time over here. We have to, hopefully remember that phrase again from Geometry and Algebra 1, rationalize the denominator. It will sometimes happen with these completing. That's kind of the payback for this stuff being nice. Well, we've got to do this extra step here. I'm going to first make a little comment. I am going to rationalize the denominator. I'm going to rationalize the denominator, which means do what to it? Multiply by root 3 by what you had in the denominator times root 3 over root 3. It's going to be okay.
Wait, how did it just turn into a 3 magically?
I'm going to multiply by root 3 over root 3. What's that like multiplying by?
Oh, that's why it's an orange.
Right. Yes. I was trying
I was
to.
so confused. I thought it just magically turned into 3.
Root 15 over root 9? How is this any better?
Because in the bottom,
What is root 9? 3. Okay. Oh my gosh. X minus 2 plus or minus root 15 over 3? Add. Oh my gosh. Two plus or minus root 15 thirds. Well, yeah. Which means when I do give you some homework, I'm not going to give you like 30 of these.
There are so many little, if you go wrong, any of
Right.
the above is wrong.
So this is really about kind of understanding why the process is working. The more we understand that, the easier it's going to be to know what the next, okay, I've got a square, how do I undo that? Plus or minus the square root. It's more about understanding why the process is working to kind of work our way through this stuff. Last one, letter D. I want to see if you can do the move it step, the divide step, and figure out what you're going to add to both sides. See what you can do with those. Use the others as a model. And then stop before you do your factoring so we can make sure we have the right numbers. Again, I feel like this page is about as tough as this stuff is going to get. Half that middle number, we'll square it, and we'll add that to both sides. We should have x squared minus 7 thirds x plus something equals negative 5 thirds plus something. What was that, Marcus? Be careful. What happens when you square a negative? Positive. We're always adding something, never subtracting at the end. I think 49 over 36. Again, I'm doing my half the middle term. What's half of negative 7 thirds? We'll multiply a half times negative 7 thirds. Negative 7 over 6, we'll square it. We'll get 49 on the top, 36 on the bottom. I'd like you now to factor. And you know what? No, I want to see if you can finish the whole thing. Do the factoring, do the adding the fractions. Then ask yourself, how do we get rid of the square? So do that. See how far we can get with this. Common denominator. I want it to be 36. What are you going to multiply this one that had a 3 by? 3 times what gives you 36? That's what we're doing, times 12 times 12, to make sense out of that. Shouldn't be negative, should be positive.
Wait, 49 over 36 is two perfect squares.
Yeah, but it's always two perfect squares because that's how I got it, by squaring two numbers. That's not the important part. The important part is what happens after you get your common denominator and add. Then we'll see, are they still two perfect squares?
That's false.
Yes, because no matter what you square a positive, you get a positive. Square a negative, you get a positive. Always plus at the end. What's inside with the x when you factor? Minus 7 over 6. Just this number before we did our squaring. Minus 7 over 6 in parentheses squared. And yeah, I've got some work to do over here. Gonna do times 12 plus 12. Let's see. Negative 60 over 36 plus 49 over 36. Maybe that.
How are you going so fast?
Okay. Well, like, half the class is sitting there already done. I think I'm going that fast. There's that too. It'd be a little scary if I didn't. Don't worry about that right now. Do you have that answer? Well, good.
Stop being fresh. Stop being
Later.
fresh. Can't trust stuff.
In like movies, when they like talk about building rocket ships, there's like best lines of
Okay. So you can consider yourself smarter than someone who builds rocket ships, although I don't think I believe that there's less work. Okay. So a few things. Once again, actually, let me stop this.
Wait, it's like the entire school day.